So, it was supposed to be a normal night, you know? Those going away parties that the office crowd always throws, with cheap beer and boring conversation. I've never been a fan of those things, but Jack, my boss, insisted I go. It'll be good for networking, Peter, he said. I really wanted to leave early and crash on the couch with a pizza, but I gave in. The party was at the house of Mike, one of the company's accountants. A quiet little suburb in Ohio, a typical neighborhood where the most exciting thing that happens is someone mowing the lawn. After a few hours of pretending to have fun, I decided to make a quick escape. The backyard seemed like the perfect place for it, with that cool night air and the chance to light up a joint without the office crowd judging me. But then, man, everything changed. I was there, just chilling, when I heard a strange noise. Muffled laughter, sounds that I couldn't identify at first. At first, I thought it was just the guys getting drunker than usual, but then I saw it. And, holy shit, I wish I hadn't seen it. In the corner of the yard, half hidden by the shadows, was Jack, along with Mike and two other guys from the office. They were on top of a guy, one of the guests, I think, beating him up. And it wasn't just a playful push. They were beating him up, with a brutality I had never seen before. I was paralyzed, like, unable to believe what I was seeing. My boss, that guy who only talks about numbers and goals, was there, punching a guy in the face who couldn't even defend himself anymore. They were laughing, as if it was the most normal thing in the world, while the guy on the ground groaned, almost unconscious. My heart started beating so fast I thought it was going to come out of my mouth. But I knew I had to get out of there. Quietly, I started to walk away, trying not to draw their attention. Each step seemed to make more noise than the last, and all I could think about was how to get out of there without being seen. When I finally reached the door, I opened it slowly, trying not to make a sound. As soon as I entered the house, the sound of loud music and the chatter of the people inside hit me, and for a second, it seemed like everything was normal. But I knew it wasn't. I knew what I had seen. So I did the only thing I could think of to do. I left. I grabbed my coat and walked out the front door, without saying a word to anyone. On the way to my car, I felt like someone was watching me. But when I looked back, I saw no one. When I got home, I locked myself in my apartment and tried to think of what to do. Tell someone? Call the police? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that no one was going to believe me. Who would believe that Jack, the most straight-laced guy in the world, was involved in something like this? And what the hell was I going to say? Hey, I saw my boss and some coworkers beating up a guy in the backyard of the party. Sounded crazy. For the next few days, I tried to act normal, but it was hard. What I had seen that night wouldn't leave my mind. I went to work, keeping my head down and avoiding contact with Jack and the others as much as possible. But they noticed, of course they did. First came the looks. Those quick glances that seemed to say, "We know you know." And then the messages started. First, there was a text message, with no return number, saying, "Stay quiet, Peter. For your own good." Then, a note on my car, stuck to the windshield, "You've seen too much. Don't ruin your life over this." By this point, I was terrified. I had no idea what to do. I knew I was in danger, but who was going to help me? These were guys from my work, people I saw every day. How could I fight it? Things got worse when I started to feel like I was being followed. On the way home, at the grocery store, even when I was going to get a coffee, I felt this presence. I never saw anyone, but I knew they were there. They were watching me, waiting for me to do something stupid. I had no choice, right? I started to consider my options, but honestly, there weren't many. The idea of going to the police still crossed my mind, but I knew it would be a long shot. These guys had power, money, and probably more secrets than I wanted to know. It was a morning like any other, or at least I thought it was. I got into the elevator as usual, sleepy-faced, coffee in hand, and ready to face another shitty day. Only this time, I wasn't alone. In the back, there was a guy I'd never seen before. strange, because I know most of the people who work in the building. He seemed to know that too. When the doors closed, the guy looked at me and said, "What's up, James?" Okay, that happens. But he looked at me like we were childhood friends, like he knew everything about me. The way he spoke. I don't know, something was wrong. And I, idiot, could only say hi back. The elevator started to go up slowly, but it seemed like each floor took forever. Then the guy started talking. "You're going to the 23rd, right? You work at that big law firm. You always take the subway on the 6th line, right? Get off at the 51st and Lex station. Okay, nothing special, right? Just another stalker." But when he started talking about my routine, my favorite coffee, the times I like to run in Central Park, man, that's when things started to get weird. You like to run at night, right? Always around the reservoir. It must be relaxing. I like it too, sometimes I even see you there. Then my blood ran cold. I'd never seen this guy in my life. How did he know so much? I kept quiet, but my heart was beating 1,000 times a minute. Then, out of nowhere, he started talking about people who had disappeared. People I recognized from the news. You saw the news, right? That girl who disappeared last week, she also ran around the reservoir. Coincidence, right? And that guy, Mark, I think you knew him. He disappeared after work, also in a big building, like yours. I had a lump in my throat. I couldn't say anything, I just wanted the elevator to stop quickly. But the guy kept going. You know, James, sometimes people disappear, and no one understands why. It's weird, isn't it? Everyone is too busy with their lives to notice what's going on around them. And you, James, have you been paying attention to what's going on around you? I wanted to get out of there, but the elevator seemed to be going up slower and slower. Damn, I've never seen that elevator so slow. And the guy just stared at me with that weird smile. The doors opened, and I was out like a rocket, without looking back. But while I tried to concentrate on work, that conversation wouldn't leave my head. Who was that guy? How did he know so much about me? In the middle of the morning, I tried to forget about it, but it seemed impossible. I decided to check the security cameras, but guess what? The system was down that morning. Crazy, right? I asked the security guards, and no one knew anything. Probably someone from the building, they told me. But the guy didn't look like an employee, and no one could give me a clear answer. And that's when I started to realize. The guy knew everything about me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every move I made, it felt like someone was following me, just waiting for me to make a mistake. Man, this was starting to mess with my head. I tried to investigate on my own, to ask around discreetly, but it seemed like I was getting paranoid. No one else had seen the guy, and I was starting to think that maybe it was all in my head. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. In fact, it only got worse. At any moment, I expected that guy to show up again. One night, I decided to change my routine. I left work early, changed my subway route, and decided not to run in Central Park. But even so, it didn't help. When I walked into my apartment building, there he was, sitting in the lobby as if he had been waiting for me. The same clothes, the same cynical smile. He stood up, walked over to me, and whispered, "You know that when you start paying too much attention, bad things can happen, right? It's best not to change your routine." And, without further ado, he walked out the front door as if he had never been there. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I kept thinking about every word, every gesture. And when the sun started to rise, I had already made up my mind. I needed to get out of this shit before it was too late. But when I went to the office the next morning, something even stranger happened. People were looking at me in a strange way, as if I were a ghost. When I went to talk to the security people, they looked at me confused. "James, you didn't come to work yesterday," they told me. "No one saw you leave or come back." The problem was, I was there. I knew I had been there. I was there, wasn't I? When the neighbor next door disappeared, I didn't even bother asking what had happened. The thin walls of the building allowed me to know more about the neighbors' lives than I wanted to, but I knew the guy next door was a recluse. I almost never heard any noise coming from there. But recently, something changed. In the middle of the night, I started hearing strange sounds coming from his apartment. It was a low, almost murmuring sound, followed by knocking, as if someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. The first night I heard it, I ignored it. I thought maybe someone was there to clean the place, or a real estate agent was showing the apartment. But the next day, when the sounds continued, something bothered me. It was 2 a.m, and I couldn't sleep. The knocking and murmuring were louder, as if they were directly on the other side of the wall. It didn't make sense. Who the hell would be moving furniture around at this hour? I got up, opened the door to my apartment, and went to the neighbor's door. It was dark, and everything seemed normal outside. I put my ear to the door and listened. Nothing. The silence I suddenly heard was even more frightening. I went back to my apartment, still trying to ignore the growing discomfort. I went to bed and covered my head with the pillow, trying to muffle any sounds that might bother me. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was going on in that apartment. I'm not the type to meddle, but this was getting to the point. I went to the building manager, an old, grumpy woman named Mrs. Lewis, and asked if she knew anything about the apartment next door. She looked at me over her glasses, with that expression of someone who was already tired of life. Nobody lives there, dear. The place has been empty for months. The last tenant just disappeared. Didn't pay the rent, didn't tell anyone, just disappeared. That sent a shiver down my spine. But I heard noises there last night. Are you sure nobody lives there? Mrs. Lewis shrugged. Maybe I'm hearing things, or maybe some homeless person has managed to get in. I'll have maintenance take a look. The idea that someone might be breaking into the apartment next door didn't make me feel any better. That night, the noises continued, but this time they were more desperate. Like someone was trying to get out. Each knock got louder, and now I heard something that sounded like sobbing. I went to the apartment door again, but I didn't have the courage to knock. Something inside me told me it wasn't a good idea. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the sounds. I started recording them, thinking that if I showed them to someone, they would believe me. Maybe the police would do something. But when I showed the recordings to some friends, they just laughed, saying it sounded like wind, or the building simply settling. No one took me seriously. I was starting to doubt my sanity. Then one night, as I was listening to the recordings again, I noticed something that made my hair stand on end. In the middle of one of the murmurs, there was a word, low, almost inaudible. But there it was, help. Someone was calling for help. I decided I was going to break into that apartment. I was tired of trying to ignore it. I grabbed a screwdriver and went straight to the door next door, determined to break it down, but when I got there, the door was ajar. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I was sure it had been locked the last time I checked. I slowly opened the door and stepped inside. The musty smell hit me like a punch. The place was filthy, as if no one had set foot there in years. But what really terrified me was what I saw in the living room. On the floor, scratched into the wood, was a word repeated over and over, as if someone had tried to write it with their fingernails, help. The marks were fresh, and there were still fingernail fragments stuck in the grooves. At that moment, I heard a whisper behind me. I turned around quickly, but I didn't see anyone. Panic took over, and I ran outside without looking back. I slammed the door to my apartment and sat on the floor, panting, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. Since then, I haven't heard anything coming from that apartment. But every time I walk past the door, I get a chill. What if whatever was in there was still watching me?